Chapter 2. The Many Faces of Anger. Anger is not one-dimensional. It wears many faces, takes on different tones, and seeps into our lives in ways we may not always recognize. To understand anger, and to move beyond simply managing it, we need to see the different ways it appears. Only then can we discover how each form carries both danger and hidden potential. External anger. This is the kind of anger that bursts out for the world to see. It raises voices, slams doors, sharpens words, and sometimes even raises fists. Externalized anger makes itself known in arguments, confrontations, and heated exchanges. It is raw, visible, unsettling, and sometimes aggressive. Adrenaline is focused on making sure the other person loses their strength and/or dignity. If they would change, there would be no problem here. Yet this form of anger is not entirely negative. Its energy can be harnessed for good. It is the energy of activism, of protection for vulnerability, of making things right. Externalized anger carries energy and urgency. It tells others, something is wrong here. At its best, it can protect boundaries, speak up for the voiceless, and demand attention when something must change. At its worst, it leaves scars, on others and on ourselves. The journey of growth involves learning to take external anger, its blaming and accusatory energy, and refine it. This means to speak in I statements, not you statements. I feel, I think, I want, I believe, to be curious at best about why this situation has triggered such a strong reaction. To be solution-focused. What am I believing? What feels so unfair? What would actually help in the situation? What feels so unfair? What would actually help in the situation at hand? This takes knowledge and practice. It is more natural to blame. That has roots in our youngest years. But this is not about winning or losing. It is about owning your own part in the conflict. It does not say, I think that you should. That would be blaming and losing. When you, I assume, and I feel, when you slam the door when you come home, I assume you are angry, and I feel worried you are angry at me. Self-understanding and assertion speak truth without cruelty, set boundaries without aggression, and defend without diminishing or destroying the other. Trish and I co-directed a homeless resource center for over a decade. We have gathered many stories over the years, but this one seems appropriate for the topic we're discussing here. One morning, Mary came into the center visibly upset. As she went to the heating table to get some breakfast, I walked over and said, "Good morning, Mary." She looked at me and quickly looked away without saying anything. I said to her, "Are you okay?" She looked back at me and said, "No." "What's wrong?" I asked. "It's John. He won't ever call me when I leave him a message on the phone," she answered, so I took his phone. At that very moment, John walked in the door and Mary looked at him with disdain. She put her plate of food down, reached in her pocket, and pulled out John's phone. She then yelled at John from across the room, "How come you don't call me? Here, this'll teach you, you sob." She opened up the folding mobile phone so John could see it and broke it in half. Both of them were quite angry. I then asked, "Mary, do you think breaking John's phone is going to give you the outcome you want from him?" She said, "What?" I answered, "Calling you from his broken phone." Reflective questions. 1. When was the last time your anger came out in a visible, external way? 2. Did it cause harm, or did it help bring clarity to the situation? 3. What would it look like for you to express that same energy in a more assertive, constructive way? 4. What outcome do you want most, and how will you handle your anger to get there? Internal anger. Some anger does not explode outward, it turns inward. This anger often wears the mask of invisibility, silence, or depression, but it festers deep inside. It shows up in self-blame, guilt, fear, or shame. It whispers that we are not good enough, that we have failed, that we should have known better, or that we are unworthy of love. Internal anger can weigh a person down with depression, anxiety, despair, and an inability to see ourselves with the compassion with which we see others. In our focus on making sure everything is okay, we adapt and change so much for the other person to feel comfortable that we lose ourselves. The common language for this is codependency. Also has something to teach us. Internal anger also tells us that something is not right. It wants change. It reminds us that we are vulnerable. Internalized anger says, "This is not all your fault." It arises because we take life seriously and want to live well with others and ourselves. But something is blocking us from the inside. What is it? If you are convinced that you are wrong, you are less than, foolish, selfish, you may unintentionally seek out others who criticize you in this way, and there you are in the loop again, of self-blame and shame. Burying these feelings inside takes a toll on self-esteem and relationships. It reinforces the conviction that you alone are the cause of trouble. As you can imagine, one who externalizes and one who internalizes anger can easily fall into one another's lives and stay. Internal anger can also become misdirected anger. Out of fear over dealing with a situation directly, we was not the true source of our frustration. Story. Sarah was the kind of person who never raised her voice. She prided herself on keeping the peace, even when she was hurting inside. After her marriage ended, she told everyone she was fine. But late at night, she replayed every argument, every harsh word, and every moment she wished she had acted differently. She never yelled at her ex-husband, never slammed a door, never even cried in front of her friends. Instead, she carried the anger inward, directing it at herself. "I should have seen this coming," she thought. "I must not be lovable. I must not be enough." Months turned into years, and Sarah's smile on the outside hit a storm on the inside. She was angry, not at him, but at herself. The weight of that self-blame began to sap her energy and joy. Finally, during a quiet conversation with a trusted friend, Sarah admitted how much she still blamed herself. Her friend gently asked, What would you say to me if I told you the same story about my life?" Sarah realized she would have spoken words of comfort and compassion, not condemnation. Slowly, she began to practice extending that same compassion to herself. Her anger did not vanish overnight, but instead of letting it fester inside, Sarah's internal anger, once a silent storm, became the soil from which self-forgiveness and healing could grow. Reflective questions. 1. Do you recognize moments in your life when you've turned anger inward, blaming yourself instead of facing the situation honestly? 2. What effect has that self-directed anger had on your peace of mind or relationships? 3. What is your experience with misplaced anger? Who got hurt? 4. What words of compassion could you begin speaking to yourself to counter the harshness of your inner voice? 5. Do you know what it is like to try to change enough that the other person is okay with you, but it's never enough? Resentment. Some anger does not shout, and it does not hide. It lingers, festers, feeds on telling itself the same story of unfairness over and over and over. This is resentment, a chronic form of anger that clings to old wounds and replays old betrayals. The grudges we carry, going over and back over the story, create a kind of deep bitterness that colors how we see others and ourselves. Resentment often feels justified. After all, it usually begins with real hurt. But left unexamined, it is toxic to our entire emotional system. Resentment becomes a prison. It locks us into the past, into refeeling experiences that are over, even plotting revenge. It leads us to finding others who share similar resentments and living defensively. It makes our perspective grow ever narrower as into resentment. And it prevents us from noticing the goodness in our lives in the present. It prevents us from living in peace. And yet, resentment has a purpose too. Resentment reveals our longing for fairness, loyalty, and justice. It reveals patterns left by past wounds that are triggered in the present for us to examine and heal. When we can learn to let go of obsessing about past wrongs done to us, we become free from them. Through forgiveness, self-examination, healthy boundaries, and acceptance of human imperfection and error, resentment can transform into wisdom. That wisdom does not forget, but it refuses to chain us to yesterday's pain, and sometimes it grants us the gift of forgiveness. Story. I had been embezzled by my vice president years ago. The betrayal had left me bankrupt and humiliated. My VP was jailed and then deported, but the wound stayed fresh. Every time I drove past the empty storefront where my businesses once thrived, anger welled up again. I carried the bitterness like an unpaid debt. In my not just money, but an apology, a reckoning, a sign of remorse. That day never came. And so, year after year, I replayed the betrayal, letting it fuel resentment. Friends noticed I was quick to bring up the past. My family noticed how tense I became whenever finances were discussed. My resentment had become a lens through which I viewed life. It drained my joy and poisoned. One evening, while journaling, I asked myself a painful question. If he never pays me back, will I let him keep stealing my peace for the rest of my life? The realization struck me. My resentment was chaining me to the very man I despised. That night I prayed and made a choice. I would never forget what happened, but I would release the debt I was holding in my heart. It wasn't about excusing the betrayal, it was about reclaiming my freedom. Slowly, the bitterness gave way to wisdom. I learned to trust more carefully, to set clearer boundaries, and to move forward without carrying yesterday's poison. Reflective questions. 1. Is there someone in your past whose actions you still replay in your mind? 2. How has holding on to that resentment affected your peace, your health, or your relationships? 3. What would it look like for you to release the right to get even that you feel you're entitled to, not for their sake but for your freedom? Not for their sake but for your freedom. 4. Can you recognize any past experiences that have made you more sensitive to similar experiences in the present triggers? What are you afraid of losing? 5. Can you let go of one obsessive resentment, recognizing that this in no way saying it is okay, just that it's over? Transformative anger. There is, finally, a form of anger that points us toward the highest good. Transformative anger is not about destruction but about creation. It takes the energy of anger and channels it toward healing, justice, and renewal. This is the anger, abolition of slavery, the fight for civil rights, and the countless acts of courage that have bent history toward justice. On a smaller scale, it is the anger that helps a parent protect their child, a community defend the vulnerable, or an individual refuse to settle for a life of defeat. Transformative anger is fire, but it is a passion guided by love and is strength directed by purpose. It is the form of anger that saves us. Story. In the spring of 1930, the people of India lived under the heavy weight of British colonial rule. For decades, the British Crown had not only controlled the land and its people, but even the simplest necessities of life. One of those necessities was salt. The British taxed it heavily, forbidding Indians from collecting or selling their own salt. Imagine being told you had no right to the salt of the earth at your feet, something essential for survival in India's hot climate. This injustice struck a nerve deep in the Indian people. The anger was real. But Gandhi, their spiritual and political leader, knew that if this anger boiled over into violence, the British Empire would crush them with overwhelming force. Instead, Gandhi sought to transform this anger into a different kind of power, a power rooted in truth, discipline, and nonviolent resistance. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi set out from his ashram with just 78 followers. They walked more than 240 miles over the course of 24 days, heading toward the Arabian Sea. Along the way, thousands joined them. By the time they reached the coastal village of Dandi, their ranks had swelled into a massive crowd. Gandhi bent down, picked up a lump of natural salt from the shoreline, and declared that India had reclaimed its right to this common resource. The act was simple, yet it was electrifying. Across India, people followed his lead, making their own salt, boycotting British goods, and filling the jails with their bodies rather than responding with fists or guns. The anger of a nation had been transformed into disciplined collective action. The British, who had once seemed untouchable, suddenly found themselves facing an unshakable moral force. The Salt March did not end British rule overnight, but it lit a fire that would not be extinguished. It awakened a movement that grew stronger with each act of peaceful defiance. 15 years later, India achieved independence, not because its people ignored their anger, but because they harnessed it. The lesson is clear. Anger can destroy, or it can liberate. Gandhi and the people of India chose the latter. They proved that anger, when purified by love and disciplined by self-control, becomes power, the power to reshape a nation and the world. Reflective questions. 1. Think of a time when you felt anger towards something deeply unfair. Did you react outwardly, suppress it, or allow it to simmer as resentment? Gandhi and his followers used discipline to keep their anger from turning violent. What disciplines or practices could help you healthily channel your anger? 3. The Salt March shows how collective anger, when unified, can spark great change. Are there causes in your community, workplace, or family that could benefit from your energy being directed toward constructive action? 4. What would it mean for you to turn your personal anger into something transformative, not just for yourself but for the people around you? Choosing the path of transformation. Anger wears many faces. Sometimes it bursts outward in fiery words and actions. Sometimes it burrows inward, hiding behind guilt or shame. Sometimes it lingers for years, hardening into resentment. And sometimes, when purified and guided, it rises into its highest form, becoming transformative anger, a force for justice, healing, and renewal. Justice, healing, and renewal. Each form of anger carries both danger and a gift. External anger can protect boundaries but also wound relationships. Internal anger can reveal a longing for integrity, but left unchecked, it can damage the soul. Resentment can signal our deep desire for fairness, but can also chain us to the past. Transformative anger, when rooted in love, can reshape lives, communities, and even nations. The truth is that anger itself is not the enemy. It is a teacher. It tells us that something is wrong, that something matters, that we care deeply. The real question is not whether we will feel anger, but what we will do with it. We can let anger master us, or we can master it. We can let it burn out of control, or we can harness its fire to warm, to light, and to guide. The choice is always before us. As you move forward, remember, anger is not something to fear or suppress. It is something to recognize, respect, and redirect. When we do this, anger becomes more than an powerful tool for growth, courage, and lasting change.